name is Kinnie Wagner, and I was born in a one-room cabin near Copper Creek outside of Gate City, Virginia, just after the turn of the century. My family was a typical pioneer family. We still raised all our own crops, tended our farm animals, and hunted for all our meat. In a world of make it do or do without, my pa was a farmer, working sunup to sundown in the fields. He made all his own tools and spent most of his time with his best friend, named Nellie, which just happened to be our own work mule. Ma, on the other hand, she was a kind-hearted woman. She had a smile that would just light up the whole room, and she loved me and my younger sister more than anything in this world. She took care of everybody in the house. She cooked the food and made our clothes, much like all the other mountain women did. But she also saw to it that we learned values and morals. It seemed to me that Ma cared just as much what her children looked like on the inside as we did on the outside. Each evening after supper, my sister and I would take turns holding a kerosene lamp while Pa read a few verses from the Bible. But truth be told, it was Ma that made the words come to life. She was a storyteller and had a way about her where she could just take any passage of Scripture and apply it to our everyday lives. I always looked forward to Ma's stories. You know how sometimes life can be so good and perfect, yet it's human nature to only realize it once it's been taken away from you. And that's how it was for me. You see, our perfect little family was ripped apart. In the winter of 1909, when I was just 6 years old, Ma took sick with a fever, and she died on Christmas Day. Just like that, I had lost the most important person in my life, and I was devastated. Pa, on the other hand, couldn't take care of 2 young children on his own, and by the following summer, he had married a widow who had 4 children of her own. Within a couple years, Pa and my new stepmother had 2 children of their own. All of a sudden, there were now 3 different sets of kids in that one-room cabin. And I tell you this right now, that woman made it clear to my sister and I that we were not her children. We were always treated second class, and we would do without clothes and shoes until her children got theirs first. I even had to give up my bed so that her kids could sleep on it while I slept on the floor each night. I began to spend much of my time outside, trying to stay away from her as much as possible. I had 3 dogs that had become my best friends. Now I know it sounds strange, but it seemed like they understood me, and I understood them. I trained them how to tree coons and hunt rabbits. I even trained a German Shepherd to stay on point during quail hunts. Speaking of hunting, I had an uncanny ability of shooting. I got my first gun when I was 8, a Remington rifle, and I made it a habit of killing more rabbits and squirrels with that rifle than my pa could with his shotgun. I learned to shoot from instinct. I didn't shoulder the gun and aim. I shot from the hip. I would enter shooting contests with the men from our area, shooting turkeys that were tied behind a log. We would stand at 50 yards and take turns shooting at the turkey's head each time it popped up. Whoever could hit that turkey's head would get to keep that turkey as a prize. I won so many times that the old-timers wouldn't enter a contest if I was in it. One day, when I was 14, one of my stepbrothers stole a knife that my ma had given me for Christmas before she died. We got into a fight, and I punched him. And for that, my stepmother began to beat me. And then she took a hammer and began smashing the knife until she broke the blade in half. In that moment, I knew that I couldn't live in that cabin any longer. I grabbed my rifle and my dogs, and I set out on my own. Just like that, my childhood was over. I followed the creek through the mountains for the next couple of days before I arrived in Clinchport, Virginia. There was a buzz of excitement in the air, and all the hills folk had come to town to see the Richard Brothers traveling circus. Workers were busy setting up tents, while others tended to wagons loaded with canvas and poles that held up the big top. I had never seen so much hustle and bustle in all my life. I approached one of the straw bosses, and I asked if they needed an extra hand, and just like that, I was hired for $35 a month and even had a place to sleep if I could find one. Now my job was to set up and tear down the tents and drive a team of 4 mules loaded with equipment from town to town over the mountain roads. Each night, me and my dogs would sleep on a pile of canvas in the back of the wagon under the stars. Food, on the other hand, was scarce, and many times the boss would cut my pay, always promising that he'd make it up to me in the next town. But you see, he was a drunk, and oftentimes he could be violent. One morning, I didn't get out of bed as quick as he thought I ought to, so he woke me up by hitting me over the head with the butt of his pistol. It was like that from time to time. During my first year with the circus, we traveled through Virginia, Tennessee, and Georgia. One night in Alabama, I finally caught a break. You see, the fella who was the trick shot performer in the show was passed out stone cold drunk when it was his time to perform. The straw boss had heard that I was a crack shot, and in desperation, he decided to put me out there in front of the crowd. The boss man pulled me aside and said, "Look here, kid, here's a pistol, and we're going to put a lit cigarette in this fella here's mouth, and you're going to shoot the lid end off of it, okay? Oh, and kid, whatever you do, don't kill him. It's his first week on the job." A few seconds later, as someone was putting a cowboy hat on my head and a gun belt around my waist, I heard the circus leader address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, and now for the final act of the evening. Please welcome, all the way from El Paso, Texas, the 4-time United States shooting champion, Cowboy Kinnie." And just as someone was pushing me from behind the curtain, out in front of the roaring crowd, the boss man grabbed my hand and said, "Here, kid, here's 3 walnuts. I'm going to need you to toss them all in the air at once and shoot them before they hit the ground. Now, don't let me down, kid. If you can pull it off, I'll find a spot for you in the show." Heck, I'd been tossing chestnuts in the air and shooting them for years. I knew I could do this. As I walked center stage, the crowd suddenly went quiet. I looked out in front of me and saw a fella light a Marlboro cigarette. He took a few puffs off of it, and then he gave me a wink, indicating he was ready, even though I saw a streak of sweat trickling down his face. Now, I wasn't exactly sure what the sequence was that I was supposed to perform the tricks, so I took the 3 walnuts and I tossed them straight up and fired. Each exploded into pieces as I plucked them out of the sky, and as my pistol followed the pieces down, without even stopping, I shot the fire right out of that fella's mouth, leaving nothing but a cigarette filter. The crowd went wild. Just like that, I became the featured performing act in the circus from that moment on. I spent the next few years shooting walnuts and cigarettes and even buttons off of folks' shirts, and I gained a reputation as one of the best shooters in America. Yet, during this time, the boss man continued to rip me off my money and take advantage of me. One night, after a show in Mississippi, I saw him kick one of my dogs when the circus was pulling out for the night, and I didn't go with him. By now, I was 21 years old, and I took a job working for a lumber company. Now, this was during Prohibition, and nearly every man had a part-time job, either making or selling moonshine. Heck, as far as I was concerned, moonshine had flowed just as freely as the water back in Virginia, so I didn't see anything wrong with it. And, as it turns out, the good sheriff didn't think there was anything wrong with it either, since he was running the biggest operation of illegal moonshine in South Mississippi. He hired me as a runner. Before long, I spent nearly every night delivering white mule. The lawman liked my work ethic, and many times, instead of money, he would pay me with goods that he had confiscated during his arrest. Heck, one night he even gave me a big fancy watch. Things were finally going good for me. I had a good paying job at the logging mill, and I was in the good graces of the law. But before long, the FBI began investigating the good sheriff for his illegal distillery operation. And wouldn't you know it, the sheriff pinned it all on me and promptly arrested me for for stealing the watch that he had given me. Now, you see, I had never been arrested in my life, and I wasn't about to lay down and just take the fall for the sheriff. And that night, I overpowered the guard, and I stole a horse and escaped the jail. I immediately went home and grabbed my guns and my dogs, and I made up my mind to get out of Mississippi just as soon as possible. However, newspapers ran my story and the supposed crimes all over the area, and everyone was looking for me. So I found an abandoned house and decided to lay low for a few months, especially since winter was approaching. At daybreak on Christmas Eve of 1924, my dogs woke me up. They seemed to have heard something outside, and within a few moments, a voice shouted, "Kinnie Wagner, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up." I immediately got up and threw my pants on and stuck my pistol in my belt. I was still barefooted when I opened the door to try to talk some reason into the situation. No sooner than I cracked the door, the sheriff shot me in the midsection. I fell back inside the house. The bullet had struck my pistol, taking much of the impact and blowing the handle off of it. But I was still wounded and bleeding bad. In that moment, I saw my 12-gauge shotgun leaning in the corner. I quickly grabbed it and decided to make a run for the woods out the back door. No sooner than I went out the back, bullets started flying, kicking up dirt all around me. It was all surreal, and time seemed to slow down. How was this happening? I wasn't a violent man, and I knew very well that the Bible said, "Thou shalt not kill." But I also knew that there was nothing in the good book that said you couldn't defend yourself when someone was trying to kill you. Without even thinking, while I was running full speed towards the swamp, the sheriff cocked his pistol and began aiming at me. I unloaded both barrels of that shotgun, hitting him in the shoulder and the chest, killing the lawman instantly. I disappeared, barefooted into the woods. Just like that, I was wanted for murder with a $1,000 bounty, wanted dead or alive, put on my head. And by the next day, a 100-man posse with bloodhounds were tracking me. But I knew how to make my way through the wilderness since I had grown up in Appalachia. Before long, I had made my way on foot, traveling the back roads and the trails until I got to Birmingham, Alabama, where I bought a horse and made my way to East Tennessee. There, my sister caught up with me and gave me some money and supplies. We met in a secluded area of Kingsport, Tennessee, at the fork of the Holston River. It was the first time we'd seen each other in years, and neither of us could believe how this all happened. Yet, by now, my face had been plastered on newspapers all over America, and it turns out someone recognized me and called the cops. And while we were sitting there eating, I looked up and saw police officers approaching from 3 sides. There were 5 of them. We quickly got up and started walking away from them to avoid a confrontation, when suddenly bullets started flying. We both ran as fast as we could. Bullets were kicking up mud on her dress, and one bullet clipped her hair. Again, in pure survival instinct, I pulled out my pistol. I shot one cop straight on. Just then, another was firing at me from behind, so I shot him over my left shoulder before spinning around and shooting the third cop. The other 2 cops turned tail and ran. But the damage was done. Within the span of just a couple of months, I had killed 3 cops and severely wounded a 4th in Mississippi and Tennessee. The next day, I decided to turn myself in. Yet, when details of my story and crimes hit the newspapers, many of the public seemed to agree that I was only acting in self-defense. And wouldn't you know it, thousands of dollars began pouring in from all over America to pay for my legal defense, mostly from women. Now, the wheels of the justice system turned much quicker back then, and my case went to trial in April of 1925. And, despite a top-notch defense team, I was found guilty of first-degree murder for killing those 2 Tennessee cops and sentenced to death by the electric chair. My defense team quickly appealed to the Tennessee Supreme Court. But me? There was no use sticking around to see how that was going to turn out. Within a month, I had broken out of jail and was on the run again. I decided to get as far away from Tennessee as I could. Once I crossed the Mississippi River, it was a brand new world, but there were no mountains, and traveling was made easy. Before long, I had traveled through the desert of Texas, where the only thing I had to worry about was rattlesnakes and hunger. One day, I stumbled upon a Mexican wagon train that was hauling oil to a mine about 18 miles from the border, and even though they couldn't understand a word I said, they gave me a ride. I decided to try my luck in Mexico, so I swam across the Rio Grande River, past Border Patrol. But once I got there, I almost died of thirst in the mountains. The only water that saved my life was the dirtiest, nastiest puddle of water you ever saw, but I drank it. I managed to stay in Mexico for a year, but before long, they got to thinking I was a spy, and I had to fight my way back towards the American border. I was shot twice and had 2 horses shot from underneath me trying to get out of there. I managed to get back past Border Patrol, and I made my way to San Angelo, Texas, where I caught a ride with a busload of Mexican cotton pickers headed for northwest Louisiana. I worked for a while there before I made my way into Arkansas, and I got a job working on a farm in Texarkana. One night, I found myself in a poker game with 4 brothers who were deep into a whiskey bottle and didn't take too kindly to me taking all their money. Before I knew it, one of them hit me over the head with a pistol, knocking me unconscious. And while I was out, they kicked 2 of my teeth out and then went back to playing cards. When I came to, I tried to crawl out the door. One of them looked up and said, "That bastard's still moving," and fired a shot at me. Before I knew it, I'd pulled my pistol out of my pants and shot 2 of them dead and wounded the 3rd while the 4th one escaped. Now I had a $2,500 bounty on my head and a posse of 100 men looking for me in Arkansas. That night, I was hiding in the woods as I heard several of the posse members approaching. I pulled my pistol out, ready to strike first this time. Yet, to my surprise, the first person I saw leading the way was a woman. You see, it turns out the sheriff of Miller County, Arkansas, had recently been killed in a moonshine raid gone wrong, and his wife was serving as sheriff in his place. And me? Oh, I had too much respect for a woman to ever harm one. In that moment, I stepped out of the bushes and surrendered to her. So you see, by 1926, the law had finally caught up with the notorious outlaw, Kinnie Wagner, and at the hands of a woman sheriff. When he was asked about it, Kinnie was reported to have said, "Oh, I'm too much of a gentleman to ever raise a hand against any woman." However, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Arkansas were arguing over who was going to get to try Kinnie for his murders. And in the end, Mississippi won out, where Kinnie Wagner was tried and convicted for killing the crooked moonshine sheriff and promptly sentenced to life in prison at Parchman Penitentiary, deep in the cotton fields of Sunflower County, Mississippi. But hold on now, that's not the end of the story. You see, Kinnie was a good-looking fella, 6 feet tall, with an athletic build, charming brown eyes, and a winning smile. Ladies loved him, and men thought of him as a folklore hero. So much so that 3 songs were written about him and topped the charts during the 1920s, and the prison was flooded nearly every day from women all across America wanting to marry him. So many visitors came to visit him every day that Kinnie finally got another prisoner who favored him a bit to stand in for him so he could focus on writing love letters back to all the ladies. And before long, he had charmed the prison guards too. So much so that they made him a trustee, and they allowed Kinnie to start training all of the bloodhounds to track prisoners. Kinnie was so good in the woods that the guards started bringing him along to capture prisoners who tried to escape through the swamps and the woods. You see, during this time, Parchman didn't have enough paid guards, so they would arm the prisoner trustees with rifles and even machine guns to help keep the other prisoners in line. And it seems Kinnie was truly a reformed man, and before you knew it, he had his very own machine gun that he took out to help the guards track prisoners. The governor of Mississippi took notice of how many prisoners Kinnie had tracked and returned, and began rewarding the reformed outlaw with 10-day prison pardons during Christmas so Kinnie could catch up with all his family and lady friends. And so it was until 1940. Kinnie was 14 years into his life sentence when one night he He was out with a prison guard with a carload of bloodhounds, searching for an escapee on a dark gravel back road. The two were in deep philosophical talk. Kinnie spoke up. "You know, sir, the longer I live, I've realized that you can never trust people. I tell you, it's true. The more time I spend with dogs, the less I trust people." "That's a good point you make, Kinnie," the guard replied when he noticed something sticking into his side. In that moment, he realized that Kinnie was pointing his pistol at him. He pulled the car over, and Kinnie disappeared into the woods. When the guard unleashed the dogs to track the fugitive, every dog simply laid down and wouldn't move, since Kinnie had spent the past 14 years teaching each one of them how to not track him. Kinnie spent the next 3 years a free man until the FBI arrested him. Back to Parchman Penitentiary he went, where once again he was so trustworthy and loyal that they made him a trustee and put him back to training the bloodhounds and gave him yearly 10-day Christmas paroles. Then one day in 1948, Kinnie simply walked out of the prison gate with his government-issued machine gun and escaped again. Once again, the bloodhounds had been trained not to track him. The outlaw would remain on the run for the next 8 years when a jealous man tipped off the FBI to his whereabouts in Scobie, Mississippi. So in 1956, Kinnie went back to Parchman Penitentiary for the third and final time, where once again they allowed him to train dogs. But you see, by now, Kinnie was a sick man, suffering from serious heart and liver conditions. So he spent the next 2 years in and out of the prison hospital. By 1958, Kinnie was very weak and bedridden at the hospital. However, his favorite dog, Queen, had just had puppies. So he talked to prison officials into letting him go see his dog one last time. Kinnie petted Queen and then reached down to pick up one of the 2-day-old puppies. In that moment, he was so overcome with joy and emotion that his weak heart stopped beating and he collapsed dead from a heart attack. 4 days later, Kinnie Wagner, the notorious outlaw who had outwitted the law for nearly 4 decades, was laid to rest in Gate City, Virginia, where over 15,000 people from all across America came to pay their last respects at his funeral. To this day, many folks say Kinnie was just born in the wrong century. Had he lived back in the great pioneer days, Kinnie's guns might have played an important role in winning the West. His name might have been mentioned along with other great men such as Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, Wyatt Earp, and Buffalo Bill. What about you, my friend? What do you think about Kinnie? Was he an outlaw, a hero, or somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments below. And make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for more true stories on Appalachia's past.